You did everything right. The 5 a.m. alarms, the cold plunges, the habit stacks, and the productivity apps, and the journaling and the protein targets. You built the life that was supposed to feel like something, and mostly it just feels like more work. That's not a discipline problem. That's a completeness problem, because hustle culture sold you half the answer and called it the whole thing. Discipline builds the structure of a good life. But Wu Wei, the Taoist principle of effortless action, is what makes that structure worth actually living inside. To see why you need both, you have to understand what each one actually does. What discipline actually does and doesn't do. Most people think discipline is about willpower, about white-knuckling your way through things you don't want to do. That's not really what it is. Real discipline is a system of repeated decisions that removes friction from hard things. You decide once, in advance, that you wake up at a certain time, that you move your body before you open your phone, that you do your focused work before you check your messages. After enough repetition, those decisions stop costing you anything. They just run. That's the real value of discipline. It clears the path so you don't have to spend energy finding it every morning. What it can't do is tell you which path to clear, and it absolutely cannot make the arrival feel like anything once you get there. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. The brain predicts in advance how good something will feel when you achieve it, and it almost always overestimates. You get the promotion, the body, the revenue number, the finished project, and the emotional payoff is real, but it's short, and it fades faster than you thought it would. Then the brain just resets and starts predicting how good the next thing will feel. Psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky's research on this shows that about 50% of your baseline happiness is genetically set, roughly 10% is determined by circumstances, and the remaining 40% is what your daily activities and mental habits actually move. Achievement by itself sits mostly in the circumstances bucket. It moves less than we expect. High performers feel this acutely. You can find people who have hit every metric they set for themselves, elite athletes, executives, entrepreneurs, who describe a specific kind of emptiness that lives right behind their success, not depression exactly, more like arriving at a destination and finding out the destination was just another transit point. Hustle culture's answer to that feeling is always the same: set a bigger goal. The real problem is that it's treating discipline as a destination instead of a tool. The grind isn't supposed to be the point. It's supposed to be the scaffolding. By midlife, most people have already answered the first question. They've proven they can do hard things. They woke up early, they pushed through, they built something. The question that starts pressing in around 50 isn't, can I be disciplined? You've settled that. The question becomes, am I doing the right hard things, and am I doing them for reasons that still make sense, given who I actually am now? That's a completely different question, and discipline on its own has no mechanism for answering it. Discipline runs the program. It doesn't audit whether you're still running the right one. This is exactly where Taoism enters, not with a better productivity system, but with a fundamentally different question about what effortful action is even for. Wu Wei, what flow actually means. Before anything else, clear the most common misreading. Wu Wei doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean floating through life on good intentions or waiting for the universe to sort things out. The literal translation from Chinese is non-doing or effortless action, which sounds contradictory until you understand what kind of effort it's talking about. Wu Wei is action that's aligned with the natural conditions of a situation rather than forced against them. Water is the image Lao Tzu keeps returning to in the Tao Te Ching, and it's worth sitting with. Water doesn't attack rock. It doesn't try to be harder than the obstacle. It finds the available path and moves through it. And over long enough time that patient low-resistance movement carves canyons. The force is real, the output is real, but there's no strain in it. Lao Tzu asks, do you have the patience to wait until your mud settles and the water is clear? That question is doing a lot of work. It's saying that most of our effortful action happens while the water is still muddy, while we're still reacting, still anxious, still forcing. Wu Wei is what happens when you act from clarity instead of urgency. In practical terms, it looks like this. A surgeon who has done 10,000 operations doesn't consciously think through each step anymore. The training is so complete that the knowledge lives in the hands, not the analytical mind. A jazz musician who has spent years on scales reaches a point in performance where the theory disappears and something else takes over. The music just comes. Neither of them is being lazy. Neither of them stopped working. They worked so completely that the work eventually stopped feeling like work. This connects to something neuroscience has been mapping since the 1990s. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states identified a specific mode of brain operation where the prefrontal cortex, the part that monitors, second guesses and edits, goes quiet. Pattern recognition accelerates. Time perception distorts, usually compressing, so hours feel like minutes. Csikszentmihalyi found this state consistently across surgeons, athletes, chess players, artists, and programmers. What they all had in common wasn't the absence of skill, it was the presence of enough skill that conscious control became unnecessary. The brain shifted from managing the task to just doing it. That's the neurological face of Wu Wei, not the absence of ability, the saturation of it. What this gives you that no amount of discipline can manufacture on its own is a specific feeling that what you're doing and who you are the same thing. There's no performance in it. You're not maintaining anything. You're not managing an image or tracking a metric or pushing against resistance. You're just fully inside the action. People who've experienced genuine flow states consistently describe it the same way. A sense of rightness, of total presence with no gap between the person and the thing being done. That gap closing is what Wu Wei actually points at. Discipline, at its best, keeps you moving. Wu Wei is what it feels like when the moving is exactly right. One produces output. The other produces the sense that the output means something, that you're actually inside your own life, rather than just operating it from a slight distance. So if discipline builds and flow fulfills, and the research and the philosophy both point in the same direction on this, why do most people end up with one and not the other? Why they're usually in conflict? Part of this is cultural. Western productivity culture has spent decades treating rest and ease as threats to performance, the idea being that if you're not pushing, you're falling behind. Meanwhile, Taoism has been misread in the opposite direction, as a kind of philosophical permission slip for doing nothing. So most people encounter these two things as opposites and never try to hold them at the same time. But the deeper conflict isn't between two cultures. It's happening inside you, and it runs on a timing problem. When you're in heavy discipline mode, your attention is almost always living in the future. You're tracking whether you hit the target, measuring the gap between where you are and where you're supposed to be, optimizing the next step. That forward-leaning orientation is useful for building things. It's completely incompatible with flow, because flow only exists in the present moment. You can't be monitoring your performance and simultaneously be free of self-monitoring. Those two states cancel each other out. There's also something more personal at work for a lot of people. Discipline, when you run it long enough, stops being just a behavior and becomes an identity. You become the person who never misses a day, who doesn't make excuses, who pushes when others quit. That identity is genuinely hard-won, and it earns real respect from others and from yourself. The problem is that rigid identities resist adjustment, and Wu Wei requires the opposite of rigidity. It requires you to read what's actually happening right now and respond to that, rather than running the same program, regardless of conditions. The person whose entire self-concept is built around never stopping finds it almost impossible to let go when letting go is exactly what the situation needs. Then there's the most frustrating part of this whole dynamic. You cannot force your way into effortlessness. The harder you try to manufacture a flow state, the further it moves away from you. Sitting down and demanding that your mind go quiet is a contradiction in practice. Urgency blocks the very thing you're trying to reach. Most people who've tried to meditate for the first time discover this immediately. The attempt to force stillness creates noise. Wu Wei, by its nature, can't be seized. It has to be allowed, and allowing is not a skill that discipline training develops. At midlife, this conflict often reaches a specific pressure point. Many people arrive at 50 or 60 carrying decades of discipline-built habits and routines that made complete sense at 30 but no longer fit who they have actually become. The career, the schedule, the whole operating structure was built for a version of themselves that has genuinely changed, but they keep running the old program anyway because stopping it feels like admitting failure. The habits are still producing results, so there's no obvious reason to question them. What's missing isn't measurable. It's just that low-grade sense of tension, of always working and never quite arriving, of a life that's full but somehow not satisfying in the way it should be by now. That's not a discipline failure. That's what happens when a system has no mechanism for asking whether it's still pointing in the right direction. The middle path, discipline as the container, flow as the content. Lao Tzu makes an observation in chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching that most people walk past without stopping. He says a cup is shaped by its clay, but it's the empty space inside that makes it useful. 30 spokes meet at a wheel's hub, but it's the hole at the center that lets the wheel turn. The form and the emptiness aren't fighting each other. The form exists to make the emptiness functional. Take away the walls and you don't have more freedom. You just have clay on the floor. That's the actual relationship between discipline and Wu Wei. And once you see it that way, the conflict dissolves. Your routines, your systems, your work blocks, and your sleep windows and your training, those are the walls of the cup, not prisons, containers. They're what give the empty space a shape it can hold. Flow, the quality of presence and effortlessness and genuine aliveness that Wu Wei points toward, needs that container. Without structure, flow doesn't expand freely. It just dissipates. A river with no banks isn't more powerful than a river with them. It's a swamp. So the practical question stops being, how do I balance discipline and flow and become something more useful? What does my container actually look like, and is there real space inside it? Here's a way to think about building that. 3 layers, each doing a different job. The first layer is your non-negotiable anchors. Sleep, movement, a defined window of focused work. These don't require daily decisions. You've already made the decision, so the mental overhead is gone. This is discipline in its most efficient form, invisible, automatic, load-bearing. These anchors don't need to be elaborate. They just need to be consistent enough that your nervous system stops treating them as questions. The second layer is what you could call flexible response zones. These are blocks of time you protect from agendas, not free time in the way people usually mean it, scrolling, recovering, waiting to feel better, scheduled time where you follow your actual energy rather than a task list. You might write, you might walk, you might sit with a problem you've been avoiding. The rule is that nothing is optimized inside these windows. You're not tracking output. You're in there to notice what wants to happen naturally and then let it. The third layer is a question you ask yourself periodically, not daily, more like weekly. Just this: Am I forcing this or following it? That's a diagnostic, not a judgment. If you're forcing, you're not in flow, and you're probably burning energy on friction that a small adjustment could remove. If you're following, you're inside the cup, doing exactly what the cup was built for. The checkpoint doesn't change anything by itself. It just keeps you from drifting for months inside a system that stopped fitting without you noticing. Now think about how elite athletes actually train. The discipline they bring to preparation is often brutal. Repetition, correction, drilling the same sequences until conscious thought gets completely bypassed. What that process is building, though, isn't performance, it's permission. When competition arrives, they don't have to manage themselves. The body already knows. The preparation disappears into the movement, and what's left is pure response. The discipline was always just building the conditions for that moment. It was never the point of the moment itself. If you're past 50, you likely don't need more anchors. You've probably built plenty. What you might need is an honest audit. Look at the systems you're running and ask which ones are still load-bearing walls and which ones are just habit for habit's sake, structure with no real space left inside it. The goal isn't to dismantle what you've built. It's to make sure the cup still has room for something to actually live inside it. What the integrated life looks like in practice. Here's what this actually looks like on a Tuesday, not a retreat, not a sabbatical, just a regular day. You wake up at the same time you always do, not because you're proving something, but because your body stopped fighting it years ago. You move, you eat, you sit down for your focused work block before the world has fully loaded its demands onto you. None of that required a decision this morning. The anchor's held, which means your energy is still mostly intact when you actually need it. Somewhere around midday, something shifts. You're working on a problem and you stop feeling like you're pushing it and start feeling like you're inside it. The self-monitoring drops away. You're not thinking about whether you're being productive. You're just moving through the thing and it's moving through you at the same time. An hour passes and it registers as about 15 minutes. That's not magic. That's what happens when the container is solid enough that you can stop thinking about the container. Later, you've scheduled nothing, not rest exactly, just unstructured time with no deliverable attached to it. You follow whatever pulls at you. Maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a conversation you've been meaning to have. Maybe you just sit outside and let your mind do whatever it does when you stop directing it. The discipline-trained part of you might still twitch slightly at the absence of output. That twitch is worth noticing, but you don't have to act on it. This is the flexible zone doing its job. The signal that the system is working isn't a feeling of achievement. It's closer to the absence of the gap, that low-grade split between the person doing the life and the life itself. When the system is working, that gap closes. You're not managing things from a slight remove. You're just in it. When it breaks down, the signal is equally clear. Productive but joyless means the container is full, and there's no space left inside it. You're all cup and no water. Peaceful but directionless means you've got water with nothing to hold it. Spread thin, going nowhere in particular. Both states are telling you something specific about which layer needs attention. Neither is a character flaw. The Taoist reading of rest matters here because most people still treat it as recovery, something you earn after enough output, a way to refill so you can go back to grinding. But Wu Wei doesn't sit at the end of the discipline cycle as a reward. It runs through the whole thing. The moments of genuine ease, the work that flows rather than grinds, the conversations that go somewhere without being engineered. These aren't breaks from the system. They're evidence that the system is functioning the way it's supposed to. Lao Tzu writes in chapter 15 that the master doesn't seek fulfillment. So when old things fall away, new things can arrive. What he's pointing at is a kind of active openness, not emptiness for its own sake, but space that's been deliberately kept clear so something real can move into it. Discipline keeps that space available. Flow is what actually occupies it. There's a fear worth addressing directly. Some people, when they hear "let go of the discipline identity," immediately picture themselves falling apart, sleeping until noon, abandoning the things they've built, losing the thread entirely. That fear is understandable, but it's aimed at the wrong thing. Real Wu Wei demands more self-knowledge than grinding does, not less. You have to know yourself well enough to tell the difference between resistance that's worth pushing through and resistance that's telling you something true. That's harder than just following the program. It requires you to actually be present to your own experience, which is exactly what years of pure output focus tends to erode. This isn't a philosophy you install once and leave running. It's a calibration you keep returning to. Discipline without flow is a machine with no one home. Flow without discipline spreads everywhere and arrives nowhere. You need the walls and you need the water. One without the other is just incomplete. So, this week pick one anchor you'll actually protect and find one moment each day where you stop optimizing and just inhabit what you've already built. If this tension is something you've been living inside, drop your version of it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more thinking like this.